So it is a very special privilege to be here. One lesson I already learned today is I will never follow Ruth Weiss in a speech again. You know, on anti-Semitism, the truth is that, as Dorothy Parker once said, everything has been said, just not everybody has said it. So I will add to the melange of comments and assessments, which I've been thinking about really intensely since my first conversation with Roger and Eric some months ago. This is the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the 85th anniversary yesterday of Kristallnacht. So an appropriate time for us to come together to speak about anti-Semitism. It is like sending a Jewish telegram. Start worrying, details follow. We all are worrying about anti-Semitism indeed, but it's a dilemma that all of us feel because we have it so good, yet why is it so bad? Why is it that we see the rise in places that we've not seen it before of anti-Semitic manifestations and concerns? In the years since the liberation of Auschwitz, how much has really changed? Is the world a more caring place? Is there less indifference? Ask the Yazidis, ask the Copts, ask the Kurds, and you will get your answer. The thing that has changed for us is one major development, and that is the creation of an independent, free, brave, courageous state of Israel. Sha'al avicha v'yagetcha zekenecha v'yomru lach. Our Torah teaches us that we should ask our parents and our grandparents when we face crises, and they will tell you. Zechar Yamot Salam, remember the days of old. Why does Judaism keep telling us to look back? Because that's the only way to look forward. This is unique to Judaism, that our view of history is that we look back in order to look forward. That only those who know where they're coming from can understand where they're going. That only those who learn the lessons of the past can understand the obligations to the future. Ask any Holocaust survivor today what they see, what they hear, what they smell, and you will know. Sha'al avicha. You have to ask the past to understand our obligations to the future. It is a complex and very difficult subject with many manifestations. And so I've kept limiting down. I will not talk about the situation in Europe. I won't talk about the manifestations in other places, but try to focus on the United States and what it is that we must ultimately do. But we cannot do that without looking back. Anti-Semitism is the cause du jour today that has captured the attention of so many conferences and events, so many philanthropic dollars, so many people's concerns, and I think largely justifiably. It is hard to analyze in a summary fashion because the elements that constitute the challenge we face today require specific explication and discussion, direction if we are to come up with therapies and responses that are relevant and effective for today's conditions. After trying hard to find a way to present this in a cogent fashion, and I will try to do that by coming in three parts, discussing briefly the past, how did we get to where we are here in the United States, and what are the demands on us now, to look at the historical struggle in which Jews have engaged in its various historic manifestations, the roots and foundations to what we are confronting today. As Churchill said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. Each epoch of our history, from the periods of exiles, the attempts to enslave, convert, eradicate, each bore its own brand of Jew hatred, but common themes are repeated. The Jew was the other, not to be trusted, a scapegoat for the ills of society, a target for the anger of rulers or populations against rulers, a population to exploit and plunder. And while I can't go into each event from the Crusades, the Amalek and Haman plots, the blood libels, the inquisitions in various countries, the manifestations that we have experienced throughout our history in virtually every country in which Jews found themselves, with a few exceptions that we should note, like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Muslim countries, and Georgia, a Christian country, where Jews have lived for 2,600 years in peace and respect. The second, of course, is the present, and as I said, the third, the future. We must meet our obligations to coming generations who are looking back at us now, asking, what did we do? How did you do it? How did you face the challenge? And what is different today than what we have done in the past? Clearly, in 20 minutes, you can't do this. So I will offer the chapter titles, and I hope you will find time to expand on them later. I could have justifiably filled the time with figures, polls, and statistics and studies, but I hope you will get them and examine them on your own, because there's a statistic to meet everyone's need. Anti-Semitism is up, anti-Semitism is static, anti-Semitism is down. Numbers can be made to say whatever the authors want, but the trend depicted by virtually every study is clear. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in every sector, that we see it in every country. It is a global pandemic, and here in the United States as well. In yesterday's Parsha and Torah reading is what really convinced me to change the focus of part of my address. We read about Abraham, the Ivri, the first Hebrew. But Ivri comes from the term over, to be opposite, to be on the other side. This was the declaration of the founding father, that Jews will always be on the other side against the idol worshipers of all kinds, the idol worshipers of those days and of these days, that the Jew will also suffer. God has told him in yesterday's reading to leave his country, his home, his birthplace, the things that shape a person's identity, but not telling him where to go, because first you have to know where you're coming from. In fact, our forefathers and foremothers each faced one of three prototypes of Jew hatred that have spread and been faced by every generation thereafter. Abraham was told, you cannot live amongst us as a Jew, conversion. Isaac was told, you cannot live amongst us, expulsion. And Jacob, you cannot live, annihilation. Those are the three prototypes for what we have suffered through the generations. And the Talmud offers a one-sentence, one-phrase explanation for Jew hatred of all time and through the ages. Esav sonel Yaakov, that Esav hates Jacob. There's no reason. It is not based on facts. We saw it when Pharaoh sought to imprison and enslave the Jews. He says, Hava nischak malo, we have to deal shrewdly with them. He accuses them of nothing. He doesn't say there's a single charge. They did nothing but build Egypt, contribute to Egypt. And that he said, maybe one day they will join our enemies. They are growing strong and powerful. Maybe one day. Not because they did, not because they had the intention of doing it. Vayakam melech hadash, and a new king arises and doesn't recognize the Jew Joseph, his contributions in saving the country. How many leaders arise and forget the role of the Jews? How many German Jewish soldiers went with their medals to the Nazis when they were called for deportation? But their deeds were forgotten. These were the roots of the poisonous disease that spread across the world and was manifested in blood libels, crusades, inquisitions, local national plots. Jews were exiled, Jews were exploited in one place after another, only to find a refuge elsewhere. Ultimately, it brought Jews to these shores with its new horizons, its new opportunities, promises of freedom, but not without its own expressions of discrimination for Jews. America was indeed not immune, and laws limiting Jewish rights were not uncommon, although among the founding fathers, there was certainly sympathy and admiration on their part of the Jewish people, as George Washington encompassed into bigotry, no sanction. In the last 100 years or so, there are hallmark events that impacted our status here, from the Kishinev pogroms to the Leo Frank case, the KKK, Father Hoenlein, Limburg, nationally celebrated anti-Semites, to the closed gates of World War II, to campus quotas, the St. Louis public discrimination, and the classic dual loyalty charges, which still linger and surface. The post-war period brought some change, but unfortunately we saw no real relief. The creation of the State of Israel brought about big change. The war in '67 brought about new respect. The Soviet Jewry movement was a seminal event, a key event, but not really appreciated in its role in what we see today in terms of current anti-Semitism was the Zionism, racism resolution. Too few chose to recognize its danger. When Moynihan and then UN Ambassador Moynihan and President Herzog stood in front of the United Nations condemning it, there was not the round of applause from the Jewish community that should have been heard. Maybe because it was against Zionists, they thought it didn't affect them. We found out soon enough that Zionism, racism, something that had been worked on in the 50s and 60s, concocted by the Russians, communist government, and their allies in the Arab world, it was a watershed for us. It continues to be. BDS can be traced to Zionism, racism. So many of the other things that we see in the world can be traced to Zionism, racism, and the failure to stand up, and that it took 25 years to repeal is something that our generation has to be held to account for. I was deeply involved and will hopefully someday write what really went on in that effort of repeal. And there are heroes like Senator Moynihan who stood up repeatedly to warn about it and about its significance. There were major changes. Vatican II ended the deicide charge as we had known it, when indeed it was a critical issue and something that Jews feared and were confronted with repeatedly. It created a noticeable change. The new relationship, emerging relationship with the rapidly growing population of evangelicals who are demonstrably pro-Israel, though not all are. Not all are Pastor Hagee, with his 7.1 million members, adding 100,000 new members a month to his movement to stand with Israel and the Jewish people. If you knew the vilification we suffered when we first aligned with them and saw the potential in this relationship, today how important a role they play and how grateful we are for their support and that of every other group that stands with us. But they too are seeing a loss of support amongst their youth. Many churches still hear preachers of hate, as we know is common in many, many mosques across the United States. They too have to be held to account. There have been significant developments and challenges today. When I started in this 50 years ago, as you heard, in Philadelphia, the big issues confronting the community, thank you for the Philadelphian who's here, the big issues were Christmas stamps and Jews being excluded from country clubs. If only they were our problems today. They were wrong then. It's not right today. Polls show that Americans have a fascination with Jews. We are the most popular of any religious group, more than Catholics and Protestants. The most interest in another religion is in Judaism. And at the same time, the cancerous disease of Jew hatred is spreading across the world and in the United States. Jews are elected without constituencies of Jews. We are seeing people joining us from every specter of the community, standing with the Jewish community in times of crisis. We are represented well beyond our proportion in so many vital areas. Yet open anti-Semites get elected to Congress and are not denounced for offenses that would be not tolerated against any other group. 800 rockets can fall on Israel, and leading contenders for the presidency find no voice. Yet several could call for challenging the vital military aid to Israel. There is an indisputable change in 21st century America. 80% of American Jews feel it. Half have experienced it, and the rest know someone who has. Anti-Semitism is alive and well and thriving in virtually every part of our country and in every sector of societies. Particularly, campuses are rife with anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist manifestations. BDS and intersectionality bring other followers from various backgrounds together in the fight against the Jewish community. While not economically successful and often defeated, BDS efforts still represent a challenge to us. They have an impact. We think of those anti-Semitic tropes that are becoming more and more acceptable. The more blatant anti-Semitic manifestations on our campus is open anti-Semitism. It is why a Mahatir, an open anti-Semite, can be invited to Columbia University, as was Ahmadinejad, and Jewish students are intimidated on that same campus. We see professors allowed to continue espousing hateful comments in and out of the classroom with no repercussion. The words of hate lead to deeds of hate. When Muslim Brotherhood and Islamist terrorist money get to our campuses, we should be concerned when no action is taken. No one even investigates it. We had a meeting of the Conference of Presidents in NYU and heard students talk about the recent incidents that they had encountered, and it shocked them. In anticipation of a meeting with the president of NYU, I asked a student leader to prepare a memo for me of recent incidents. The next day, he delivered a 17-page document just from the past year. This is in our city, a Jewish city. Look at the names on the buildings at these campuses. While Congress passed anti-BDS legislation, the U.S. and many countries adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. 30 states have adopted BDS legislation. The efforts across the country continue and should be applauded. But at the same time, the hoods are off in South Carolina, and a swastika can be flown atop a flagpole in Wyoming, and students give the Heil salute, and others march in Hitler uniforms. A few of the countless daily events in the United States, from physical assaults to cemetery desecration to harassment. You saw the statistics just from the New York Police Department. 2/3 of hate crimes in New York are against Jews. It's not Islamophobia that is the real challenge. It is anti-Semitism. Hatred against any group should be unacceptable, but we have to recognize our priorities. Why do they feel that they can today act with impunity? Many have spoken up, but get little recognition. Those who have been courageous to stand with us, and yet these outliers get the media attention. It's time to stop talking about them and to focus on our friends and those who stand with us, who are courageous in the Congress of the United States and in every sector of life, but nobody names them and nobody praises them. It's time to change. With all the statistics that you have seen about anti-Semitism in America, know that the vast majority of anti-Semitic incidents are not reported. People don't bother, and yet the number keeps rising. When I see the daily reports from the Secure Community Network operation, which we created and modeled after the CST in London, regarding incidents in our communities and on our campuses, every morning, the detailed accounts of physical assaults, that Jews were targeted. I believe that this first anniversary of Pittsburgh reminds us that that was the end of innocence for American Jewry. No more denial of the reality of Jew hatred in the United States. And we should not call it anti-Semitism, because that's an antiseptic term. It is Jew hatred, blatant Jew hatred, and we must so designate it. And in the case of Pittsburgh, it was a right-wing extremist. There were more than a dozen arrested in plots since then. But the sources are the left and the right, Islamist and minority, young and old, expressed in various ways and in every possible way, on and off campus, in political campaigns, in schools and businesses. by rappers and other entertainers. The number that you will hear, arguably, of incidents, I would say, is more than 2,000 a year here in the United States, with various degrees of seriousness. We now see the inhibitions diminished and degraded the standards. As Senator Moynihan put it, we've seen the dumbing of deviancy down. We keep raising the bar on what we will tolerate. As Martin Luther King said, it's not the attacks of our enemy, but the silence of our friends. We keep allowing them to expand the range of which their acts can take place. We have to see to it now and certainly in the coming year that new laws are passed, that lip service is no longer paid, that we see Farrakhan with national leaders and David Duke lookalikes continuing to rant and rave must end. The big change here and elsewhere is the internet, and all of you know it. People and events that may never have been publicized get attention nationally. It took Hitler months to spread the big lie. Today it's done in nanoseconds. The internet poses new challenges globally and locally. It can be the most dangerous means of communication with its anonymity and the fact that each of the actions that we see coming from it, that the proposals, the incitement, the excitement of young people to hate, and the efforts to quickly remove them has faltered. It took Hitler, as I said, months. Today, in the flash of an eye, millions get the message. It has been mastered by the worst elements in society and the most dangerous players like Iran and Islamist terrorist groups. This is particularly impactful in this age of ignorance and superficiality. Nobody has patience for history. There is no context. No doubt, Jews have had it good here. America was and is good to us. But we need to take urgent and comprehensive steps to meet our obligation to future generations. 75 years ago, people here said they did not know. It was a lie. They did not want to know. They knew every day what was happening because they had broken the Nazi codes, but they didn't want the Nazis to know they had done so. Today, we know everything. There will be no cloak of ignorance to hide our shame when we are challenged for what we did or didn't do. We will be judged just as we judged a generation of 75 years ago. We will be found wanting if we have not used the tremendous capacity we have to make a difference. Moses taught us in the mitzvah of Hakel that the greatest danger to the Jewish people is not external dangers and not natural disasters. It's indifference and apathy. Those were the dangers that could not be overcome. There are many wonderful institutions, programs. There are many new efforts, but it's not enough. I call for recreating the Soviet Jewry movement here and abroad, a worldwide movement completely committed to fighting anti-Semitism and holding leaders to account. The Soviet Jewry movement made glasnost possible. They made perestroika possible. They turned the Iron Curtain into a Venetian blind. There was nothing they couldn't do because they stood together. We have to today stand together to declare that Jew hatred is unacceptable. No exceptions, no excuses. No more crocodile tears when Jews are victims, and no more memorials to dead Jews. I want the world to stand up for living Jews and a vibrant living Jewish state. It is not our responsibility. We are the victims, but indeed we have obligations. But the burden must be on the world, on opinion molders, influentials, elected officials, and others. The leaders in culture, entertainment, media, religion, academia, government, law enforcement, and the judicial sector all must step up today. Tell us what they will do. Give us specific suggestions and commitments. No more vague promises. The words of Reverend Niemöller should be ringing in their ears because they too will become victims when hate is left unchecked. It is now a pandemic, And we must cooperate across all boundaries, ideologies, and languages. We must rebuild the coalitions of the past with all ethnic, religious, and racial groups who are willing to stand with us, all who will speak up with us. Soviet Jewry became the #1 human rights cause in the world because we were in the streets, in the halls of Congress. We were joined by friends from every community and every sector who cared about freedom of justice, but we had to be there first. It must be a concerted effort and an ongoing one. We cannot eradicate anti-Semitism or hate, but we can see to it that it is disgraced, that is denounced, that is diminished into oblivion. We can build walls of public condemnation and isolation. We can demand the internet companies to take action faster and more comprehensively against promoters of Jew hatred, bigotry, whenever it appears. We must educate our youth in the elementary and high schools. They are being poisoned by the things that they access so easily on the internet, but also in their textbooks and their curricula. Go and check what your children and grandchildren are studying. You will be shocked. The appointment of special envoys on a national level and internationally are very important coordinators on a local level. It must be expanded. We need to see more legislation, as Congress is considering now, and more anti-BDS measures. No, it is not a denial of free speech to pass anti-BDS legislation. It protects free speech. We must work with the political parties to assure that the upcoming conventions are not turned into propaganda platforms against Jews or Israel. But there is one overriding obligation on us as the Jewish community, and that is achdut, Jewish unity. This is the one precondition for every great miracle that happened to us throughout the ages. Only when we are united can it lead to solidarity without. And to all of us, we must fight the indifference that challenges so many. The road to Auschwitz, it is said, was built by hate, but paved by indifference. Everyone, no exceptions, no excuses, must find a role in the solution or be part of the problem. We must end the degradation and distortion of Zionism. No more tolerance of anti-Zionism and saying it's an excuse because it is blatant anti-Semitism. BDS is anti-Semitism because it denies the one Jewish state the rights accorded to all other states, and even the right to exist. We need more outfits like the Chelsea football team and the New York England Patriots with their Stop the Hate campaign gaining influence around the world. Those with influence, sports figures, entertainers, others, must be mobilized and urged to use their influence to affect the young people of this generation, because it is to them that they look. We need to criminalize anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic crimes. We have to see to it that meaningful punishments are imposed and no more revolving door justice for those who commit hate crimes. Hate crimes undermine society, and those who do it, and those who aid them, and those who abet them must be held to account. While thankful for what we have been given, we need more grants for security, and our institutions have to give it a higher priority, but not to make them unwelcoming. We have instituted a 24-hour hotline now through SCAN so that no Jewish student is ever alone. They will be able to find a voice that will respond and help them 24/7. But every community should reach out to the campuses that they are near in locus parentis and see to it that every Jewish student, every Jewish child is invited to a Jewish home for a holiday, that they know that they're not alone in facing against an administration that may be indifferent to them. We need more legal actions to protect their rights, like the San Francisco State University case, a landmark case brought by the Lawfare Project that every university should be held to account to adopt, that demands of them to protect the rights of Jewish students and recognizes that Zionism is part of the identity of many Jews. We need to stand collectively against anti-Israel bias at the UN, the promulgation of anti-Jewish messages, including those of UNESCO, which removed the traditional Judeo-Christian names from our most sacred places, including the Kotel, the Marat HaMachpelah, Kever Rachel, Rachel's tomb, all are known today only by their Muslim names in official UN documents. As I said, we are fortunate to live in this great country. We have had great success, and don't diminish it. We have to make sure that our detractors and attackers know we will not be cowed. We will be stronger in the face of their attacks. We will be stronger in defending our rights and those of others. We will name and shame those who engage in these activities. We will make sure that they are held to account and cannot hide behind anonymous websites. We will use our free speech to counter their hate speech. We will celebrate our Jewish traditions, our Jewish history, our glorious Jewish faith, publicly and demonstratively. We should not hide wearing a yarmulke or a Jewish star because of fear or intimidation. There must be zero tolerance for intolerance. There are no exceptions, no excuses. If the World Muslim League head, Sheikh Alisa, can issue a declaration that hate stops now and denounce anti-Semitism, so must we all. We have allies and we have friends, but we must mobilize them. And so how many of you can honestly say that you have called a TV station, that you've protested an internet distortion, that you have written to a newspaper or called a radio show or confronted a representative, elected official whose views you do not agree with or invited them to educate them? How many of you have had your synagogues protected and volunteered to stand guard at a school? How many of you have talked to your children and grandchildren about what is happening, what they see on the internet and hear on campus? Our kids don't know, and we have to reach out to them and make sure that they know and are prepared to defend themselves. It's not enough to send them on birthright when they're 18. We have to inoculate them when they're in elementary school and in high school. We have to do much more to make them proud of their Jewish heritage and be willing to defend it and to know the answers, because we can be very proud of the Jewish state of Israel, its history, how it has stood up as a democracy in a sea of totalitarianism, and how it has stood against forces that endanger our own country. Never again must become a pledge that this and every generation takes, Jews and non-Jews alike. It's time for each of us to declare that we will not be silent, that we have learned the lessons of the past and understand our responsibilities to the future. Never again is a promise to future generations that they will be safe.